Welcome, 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 welcome. We are live both on our YouTube channel, which is Church Love 333. You can subscribe to that channel to catch any of our past broadcasts, and we're also here with you live this morning. So welcome. For those of you who are new to these teachings, I'm Shantae Charles, and as one of my friends funnily says, I am Googleable. So we won't go into my background and my experience because you can Google it. We are focusing on the continuation of MLK. I call it the MLK Uncut series, where we have been reading his work, and we are on day 17 of this particular book. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Chaos or community? Excited about where we are. We are actually in chapter 5, and what I've been doing is I have been breaking up these readings so that we can kind of dissect and discuss and analyze and talk about what MLK was actually saying. If you've been watching the series, you know that this is the last book that MLK wrote before he was assassinated, and I feel like he was putting all of his heart, his soul, his thoughts, his ideas into this book to help the next generation. Also in this book, as he's talking, he begins to reveal some of the ills and some of the problems that are in America today. So even as we read through, we're finding a lot of the things that MLK spoke about and that MLK had concern over are still some of the things that are still present and existent in our country today. So we've been talking about what's happened in the past, how does it relate to the present, how can we benefit from what he's already stated, what wisdom can we take away from MLK, how can we apply it to our current day situation, and then looking at ourselves individually, what can I do to be the change that I want to see in my particular field, in my community, in my areas of expertise, right? How can I use what I know or what I'm learning to actually impact and affect where I am right now? And so today we are getting into a section of the book that he calls Where We Are Going. Getting into a section of the book that he calls Where We Are Going. And I see, there we go. Let's hope that Facebook Live continues to run smoothly today. So if you're still with me, you can put some thumbs on the screen. So the section we're in is he's talking about where we are going. Some of the things that he has talked about in this book that are still very relevant to today. He starts out the book by talking about where are we, and then he moves into a section about dilemmas, and now he's talking about where we are going, and he talks about the sources of power that Black America needs to tap into. Because this section is pretty long, I'm actually going to just cover 2 of those sections today, and that's ideological and economic. Tomorrow we're going to talk about political power and voice, and then Thursday we're going to talk about the real CIA, and then Friday he's going to talk about Black folks and our weaknesses. And so one thing I do appreciate about these readings is that MLK did not just sugarcoat over any of the issues that were going on, whether they were with the Black community, the white America's response to the Black community. He covered what has been good, what needs improvement, what's being ignored, and he's also been talking about the weaknesses. So I would say in terms of statesmen, in terms of just what we remember about MLK is that he was very balanced in his assessment of what was happening. He wasn't, trying to paint Black America as, a culture or a people group with no problems, right? He didn't worship Black culture. He also was not trying to paint white America as a culture with no problems, or a culture to be elevated and uplifted and lifted up above every other culture. And unfortunately, what we have in leaders today is they do one or the other. We have a lot of leaders that bash Black America, and that's all they do is they bash, 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 bash Black America, and can never find anything good about to say about Black America. And then on the other hand, you have some people who bash white America and can never find anything good to say about white America. So we are going to jump into the section today where he's talking about, and he begins to talk about sources of power. And today we're going to cover ideological and economic. He also, in the beginning of this reading, he's going to talk about something that we are dealing with even now, and that is the government's default on their promises. The government's default on their promises. You know, there's a famous phrase that is attached to MLK about, you know, him talking about going back to Washington, marching on Washington, because he began to move from what he called civil rights to human rights. And he began to get into what he called the Poor People's Campaign. And one of the things that he wanted to do was he wanted to go back and march in Washington for the poor, Black, white, you know, anybody who was being affected economically. And so he talks about, you know, America writing a check, but, you know, when they tried to cash it, it had insufficient funds, right? So he starts out this particular part of the reading talking about the government and how the government evades action and shifts the burden onto the Black community. Remember, our government knew and understood that there was a responsibility to right the wrongs of what happened to Black America and how we came to this country. We now have a generation that, for some reason or another, does not understand that our government did indeed know that it had a responsibility to right the wrong. We now have a generation that believes that Black people are asking too much, that Black people are acting in an entitled way, when in fact the reality is our ancestors were entitled to some things. That's the reality. So you may not agree with that sentiment, but the reality is our government knew this, our government understood this, and as we go into the reading, you'll understand a little bit more about what we're saying in that regard. So let's get started. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your goodness and your mercy. Thank you for your truth. Thank you for your love. Thank you for this reading. I pray, Father, that as we read aloud, that those who will watch, they would hear, they would understand, they would take notes, they would do their research, and that you would use these readings, Father God, to guide them and give them wisdom and insight in how they can be the change that they wish to see in their environment and in their sphere of influence. In Jesus' name, amen. Where we are going. As the administration has manifested a faltering and fluctuating interest in civil rights during the past year, a flood of words rather than deeds has inundated the dry desert of expectations. One curious explanation of the defaults of the government warrants analysis because it reveals, without intention, the disadvantages under which the civil rights movement has labored. After describing the obvious, the president's overwhelming preoccupation with the war in Vietnam, it then argues that in 1965, the president was prepared to implement measures leading to full equality, but waited in vain for the civil rights movement to offer the program. The movement is depicted as absorbed in controversy, confused in direction, venal toward its friends, and in such turmoil, it has tragically lost its golden opportunity to attain change today. This argument, by explaining everything in terms of the presence or absence of programs, illuminates how the insistence on program can be used as a sophisticated device to evade action. Actually, there was no dearth of programs in 1965, ranging from my own proposal, published in 1964, for a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged, to elaborate and detailed programs in the published material of many agencies, organizations, and individual social scientists. If there had been a sincere disposition seriously to entertain a program, its preparation in final form would have taken but a few weeks. If the federal government had been consumed with fervor to strike an effective blow for civil rights, it need only have begun implementing all existing laws that are a nullity from one end of the country to the other. So again, MLK begins by telling you that one of the ways that the government evades action is by demanding proposals for programs. And what MLK is saying here is, in 1965, there were plenty of proposals, right, already given to the government. So that wasn't the holdup, but they were using that as a way to evade taking action for civil rights. And then he goes on to say, if you want to be effective, it would have been nice if you would have just started implementing the existing laws that had been put on the books. But at this point in his life, the government was slow in implementing the existing laws. We have laws right now, right, that our government is slow in implementing. They may be on the books, but justice on the books is not justice in practice. Let's keep reading. Underneath the invitation to prepare programs is the premise that the government is inherently benevolent. It only awaits presentation of imaginative ideas. When these issue from fertile minds, they will be accepted, enacted, and implemented. This premise shifts the burden of responsibility from the white majority by pretending it is withholding nothing, and places it on the oppressed minority by pretending the latter is asking for nothing. This is a fable, not a fact. Neither our government nor any government that has sanctioned a century of denial can be depicted as ardent and impatient to bestow gifts of freedom. When a people are mired in oppression, they realize deliverance when they have accumulated the power to enforce change. When they have amassed such strength, the writing of a program becomes almost an administrative detail. It is immaterial who presents the program. What is material is the presence of an ability to make events happen. The powerful never lose opportunities. They remain available to them. The powerless, on the other hand, never experience opportunity. It is always arriving at a later time. Now, I have a question. Because I keep seeing, of course, with things in the news about the football player, right? Many of the comments are centered around, he should have waited. Was this the right time? Do people in this country realize that we've been telling Black America, and we've been telling them that they've been picking the wrong time for the past 300 years? Are we aware of that? For hundreds of years, anytime any level of justice is demanded or any injustice is pointed out, one of the first things that people say is, you're picking the wrong time. So when exactly is a good time to address injustice? Especially if the injustice is not happening to you in your people group, if it was happening to you and your people group, would you want people to keep telling you for the past several hundred years, now's not the time, you're picking the wrong time to be demonstrative, or you're picking the wrong time to protest, or you're picking the wrong time to bring it up? There's never a right time to address injustice. Never. That's why he had to do it. All right. He goes on to say the deeper truth is that the call to prepare programs distracts us excessively from our basic and primary tasks. If we are seeking a home, there is not much value in discussing blueprints if we have no money and are barred from acquiring the land. We are, in fact, being counseled to put the cart before the horse. We have to put the horse, or the power, before the cart, or the programs. MLK is very clear. You're telling us to put together programs, but you're not guaranteeing any funding for these programs that you're putting together, which means, in essence, you're kind of wasting our time, because you are, as he said, you're trying to counsel us to put the cart, or the programs, before the horse, which is the power, or the economic power that's supposed to go to these programs. So MLK was aware that these were kind of like stall tactics, delay tactics for the government to actually really, as he said, implement existing law. Our nettlesome task is to discover how to organize our strength into compelling power so that government cannot elude our demands. We must develop from strength a situation in which the government finds it wise and prudent to collaborate with us. It would be the height of naivety to wait passively until the administration had somehow been infused with such blessings of goodwill that it implored us for our programs. The first course is grounded in mature realism. The other is childish fantasy. We do need certain general programs for the movement, but not for use as supplicants. We require programs to hold up to our followers, which mirror their aspirations. In this fashion, our goals are dramatized and our supporters are inspired to action and to deeper moral commitment. We must frankly acknowledge that in past years, our creativity and imagination were not employed in learning how to develop power. So MLK begins to admit what were some downfalls of the civil rights movement, how it initially got started. We found a method in nonviolent protest that worked, and we employed it enthusiastically. We did not have leisure to probe for a deeper understanding of its laws and lines of development. Although our actions were bold and crowned with successes, they were substantially improvised and spontaneous. They attained the goals set for them, but carried the blemishes of our inexperience. When a new dawn reveals a landscape dotted with obstacles, the time has come for sober reflection, for assessment of our methods, and for anticipating pitfalls. Stumbling and groping through the wilderness finally must be replaced by a planned, organized, and orderly march. None of us can pretend that he knows all the answers. It is enormously difficult for any oppressed people even to arrive at an awareness of their latent strengths. They are not only buffeted by defeats, but they have been schooled assiduously to believe in their lack of capacity. People struggling from the depths of society have not been equipped with knowledge of the science of social change. Only when they break out of the fog of self-denigration can they begin to discover the forms of action that influence events. And what happened? We broke out of this fog, but you can clearly see in our culture now that music has reniggerized a generation and put them back in this fog of self-denigration, self-destruction, right? Doing things in their community that is destructive. So now you have a whole generation that you have to reawaken. That's how the enemy works. They can then embark on social experimentation with their own strength to generate the kind of power that shapes basic decisions. This is where the civil rights movement stands today. We will err and falter as we climb the unfamiliar slopes of steep mountains, but there is no alternative, well-trod, level path. There will be agonizing setbacks along with creative advances. Our consolation is that no one can know the true taste of victory if he has never swallowed defeat. For the moment, therefore, we must subordinate programs to studying the levers of power Negroes must grasp to influence the course of events. In our society, power sources are sometimes obscure and indistinct, yet they can always finally be traced to those forces we describe as these three: ideological, economic, and political. In the area of ideology, despite the impact of the works of a few Negro writers on a limited number of white intellectuals, all too few Negro thinkers have exerted an influence on the main currents of American thought. Nevertheless, Negroes have illuminated imperfections in the democratic structure that were formerly only dimly perceived, and have forced a concerned re-examination of the true meaning of American democracy. As a consequence of the vigorous Negro protest, the whole nation has for a decade probed more searchingly the essential nature of democracy, both economic and political. By taking to the streets and there giving practical lessons in democracy and its defaults, Negroes have decisively influenced white thought. Now, this is very powerful, what he's about to say. Lacking sufficient access to television, publications, and broad forums, Negroes have had to write their most persuasive essays with the blunt pen of marching ranks. As one person said, we are one of the most fortunate generations because we have something that the previous generation did not have. Media, media, media. We do need to begin to build our own platforms by which we present our media on, because if we get banned from a platform, right, that cuts off our ability to communicate with those who are on that platform, because we don't own it. We don't own Facebook. We don't own YouTube. So we have to begin to build our own platforms of technology to present our media on, right? But can you imagine, as someone said very accurately, can you imagine if Martin Luther King had Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube? He's telling you, the media of his day was marching. The media of his day that drew public attention was marching. Here's what he goes on to say. The many white political leaders and well-meaning friends who ask Negro leadership to leave the streets may not realize that they are asking us effectively to silence ourselves. Well, isn't that what's happening now with people who have access and influence in media? Are we not now asking them to silence themselves? Are we not now saying, don't use your platform for social justice? The twice forgotten man in America has always been the Negro, he goes on to say. His groans were not heard, his needs were unfelt, until he found the means to state his case in the public square. More white people learn more about the shame of America and finally face some aspects of it during the years of nonviolent protest than the century before. Nonviolent direct action will continue to be a significant source of power until it is made irrelevant by the presence of justice. Yeah. And the reality is, you're asking people to be quiet in the absence of justice. But yet you keep saying you're proud to be an American. So when you say that, but you don't want justice for all, what you're actually revealing is that American to you does not mean all people. That's what you're revealing. If your live stream is okay, give me some thumbs up. I keep seeing that it's freezing a little bit. So if you can see and hear fine, give me some thumbs up. You can see and hear fine, give me some thumbs up. Awesome. All right. So that was his spiel on ideological power. He says, you've got to have Black thinkers interjecting into society Black thought from our perspective. And that's a whole other Facebook Live, right? You've got to increase Black media from our perspective. You've got to increase the number of Black intellectuals that can give voice in the public square to our needs, to our thoughts, to what concerns us. So that's one of the powers that MLK talked about. And having access to television, publications, broader forums, so that it can be made, it can be understood, right, that Black America, what is good, right? Black America, what our challenges are. Black America, what are we dissatisfied with? Because remember, for a very long time in this country, there was a narrative that regardless of how downtrodden we were, that the Black person or the Black Negro was happy. There was a whole perception of the happy Negro. He was happy to be in Massa's house. So we changed that narrative, right, by being able to present our own perspective about our own life, about our own experiences in the culture. That's how you change that narrative. And so, like he said, America was finally faced with the shame of what was going on when we had the access to television, publication, and broader forms. So that's why ideological power is a form of power. All right, the second one he talks about here, it's a little bit more lengthy, so I'm hoping we will get through it today. Talks about economic power. The economic highway to power has few entry lanes for Negroes. On Friday, I'm going to cover this in detail. God gave me about 5 pages, a nice little 5-page essay on the code of white supremacy and what happens when Black people pledge to this code and what happens when you break it. So we're going to cover that on Friday. But let's start here. The economic highway to power has few entry lanes for Negroes. Nothing so vivid reveals the crushing impact of discrimination and the heritage of exclusion as the limited dimensions of Negro business in the most powerful economy in the world. America's industrial production is half of the world's total, and within it, the production of Negro business is so small that it can scarcely be measured on any definable scale. Yet, In relation to the Negro community, the value of Negro business should not be underestimated. In the internal life of the Negro society, it provides a degree of stability. Despite formidable obstacles, it has developed a corps of men of competence and organizational discipline who constitute a talented leadership reserve. Their cumulative strength may be feeble measured against the mammoth of white industry, but within the community, they furnish inspiration and are a resource for the development of programs and planning. They are a strength among the weak, though they are weak among the mighty. There exist two other areas, however, where Negroes can exert substantial influence on the broader economy. As employees and consumers, Negro members and their strategic disposition endow them with a certain bargaining strength. So again, there goes that collective bargaining strength, that there is strength in our consumer power. And he's going to give some very good insight into that. Within the ranks of organized labor, there are nearly 2 million Negroes, and this is in 1967. Not only are they found in large numbers as workers, but they are concentrated in key industries. In the truck, transportation, steel, auto, and food industries, which are the backbone of the nation's economic life, Negroes make up nearly 20% of the organized workforce, although they are only 10% of the general population. This potential strength is magnified further by the fact of their unity with millions of white workers in these occupations. As co-workers, there's a basic community of interest that transcends many of the ugly, divisive elements of traditional prejudice. There are undeniably points of friction, for example, in certain housing and education questions, but the severity of the abrasions is minimized by the more commanding need for cohesion in union organizations. So one of the things he talks about here is looking at, right, what are the key industries that African Americans are 2016 concentrated in. And he's talking about beginning to focus in on those key industries that we either work in or those key industries that we consume a lot of products in. If manifestations of race prejudice were to erupt within an organized setting, it would set into motion many corrective forces. It would not flourish as it does in a neighborhood with nothing to inhibit it, but morbid observers looking for thrills. In the shop, the union officials from highest to lowest levels would be immediately involved. For internal discord is no academic matter. It weakens the union in its contest with the employers. Today, the union record in relation to Negro workers is exceedingly uneven, but the potentiality for influencing union decisions still exists. Excuse me, one moment. In many of the larger unions, the white leadership contains some men of ideals and many more who are pragmatists. Both groups find they are benefited by a constructive relationship to their Negro membership in the union. For these compelling reasons, Negroes, who are almost wholly a working people, cannot be casual toward union movement. This is true even though some unions remain hostile. In the days to come, organized labor will increase its importance in the destinies of Negroes. Automation is imperceptibly but inexorably producing dislocations, skimming off unskilled labor from the industrial force. Remember, in his book, Why We Can't Wait, MLK began to talk about how technology, if you don't get in front of it, right, or if you don't become familiar with technology, if you don't get into the technological fields, graphic design, computer programming, coding, those kinds of fields, that those jobs would begin to replace humans. And we're already seeing that a great deal of unskilled labor force, right, has been left without jobs because they've been replaced by technology. Very simple. And he saw this, 40 years before it happened. The displaced are flowing into a proliferating service occupation. These enterprises are traditionally unorganized and provide low-wage scales with long hours. The Negroes pressed into these services need union protection, and the union movement needs their membership to maintain its relative strength in the whole society. On this new frontier, Negroes may well become the pioneers that they were in the early organizing days of the 30s. The trade union movement in the last 2 decades, despite its potential strength, has been an inarticulate giant with an unsteady gait, subjected to abuse and confused in its responses. Some circles of labor, after simmering discontent, are now allowing their challenge to vent itself. The emergence of social initiatives by a revitalized labor movement would be taking place as Negroes are placing economic issues on the highest agenda. The coalition of an energized section will be needed of labor, Negroes, unemployed, and welfare recipients. This may be the source of power that reshapes economic relationships and ushers in a breakthrough to a new level of social reform. So MLK is kind of pointing out all of these different groups economically that are weak, but he's saying if you form a coalition that contains the labor workers, blacks, unemployed, welfare recipients, you could actually form a block of people who would be able to reshape and bring about new social reform, which I believe this is what led into his Poor People's Campaign, because he was gathering people who by themselves, right, were easy to pick off. The welfare recipients were easy to pick off. The unemployed are easy to pick off. But if you galvanize these groups of people who are underrepresented economically, if you bring them together in a coalition, then you could actually leverage them as a group, as a block to vote. Haven't seen that happen yet. The total elimination of poverty, now a practical possibility, the reality of equality in race relations, and other profound structural changes in society may well begin here. To play our role fully as blacks, we will have to strive for enhanced representation and influence in the labor movement. Our young people need to think of union careers as earnestly as they do of business careers and professions. They could do worse than emulate A. Philip Randolph, who rose to the executive council of the AFL-CIO and became a symbol of the courage, compassion, and integrity of an enlightened labor leader. Indeed, the question may be asked why we have produced only one Ralph in nearly half a century. Discrimination is not the whole answer. We allowed ourselves to accept middle-class prejudices towards the labor movement. Yet this is one of those fields in which higher education is not a requirement for higher office. In shunning it, we have lost an opportunity. Let us try to regain it now at a time when the joint forces of Negro and labor may be facing a historic task of social reform. The other economic lever available to the Negro is as a consumer. As long ago as 1932 in his book Moral Man and Immoral Society, Reinhold Niebuhr pointed out that boycotts against banks, which discriminate against Negroes in quantity credit, against stores, which refuse to employ Negroes while serving Negro trade, and against public service corporations, which practice racial discrimination, would undoubtedly be crowned with some measure of success. These words have proved to be prophetic, but we have been seeing the success of this approach in the last few years. SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, has pioneered in developing mass boycott movements in a frontal attack on discrimination. Our dramatic demonstrations tended to obscure the role of the boycott in cities such as Birmingham. It was not the marching alone that brought about integration of public facilities in 1963. It was not the marching alone. I know this generation says, I'm tired of marching. I'm tired of marching. I don't want to get out there and march. Well, there's other things you can do. The downtown business establishment suffered for weeks under our almost unbelievably effective boycott. The significant percentage of their sales that vanished, the 98% of their Negro customers who stayed home, educated them forcefully to the dignity of the Negro as a consumer. You want to school American society? You want to give a forceful education? Stay home, keep your dollars, invest your dollars in Black businesses. Invest your dollars where you're respected. Invest your dollars where your voice is not silenced. Doesn't that make sense? Later, we crystallized our experiences in Birmingham and elsewhere and developed a department in SCLC called Operation Breadbasket. This has as its primary aim the securing of more and better jobs for the Negro people. It calls on the Negro community to support those businesses that will give a fair share of jobs to Negroes and to withdraw its support from those businesses that have discriminatory policies. The key word in Operation Breadbasket is respect. It says in substance, if you respect my dollars, you must respect my person. If you respect my quantitative support, then you must respect the quality of my job and my basic material needs. So here is a strategy that MLK spells out that can still be used today and probably be more effective because we have social media to help us. Operation Breadbasket is carried out mainly by clergymen. First, a team of ministers calls on the management of a business in the community to request basic facts on the company's total number of employees, the number of Negro employees, the departments or job classifications in which all employees are located, and the salary ranges for each category. Now, because we have Google, some of this we can just Google, right? The team then returns to the steering committee to evaluate the data and make a recommendation concerning the number of new and upgraded jobs that should be requested. The decision on the number of jobs requested is usually based on population figures. For instance, if a city has 30% Negro population, then it is logical to assume that Negroes should have at least 30% of the jobs in any particular company, and jobs in all categories rather than only the menial jobs, as the case almost always happens to be. The next step is negotiation. The team of clergymen returns to the management of the company and transmits the request to hire or upgrade a specified number of qualifiable Negroes within a reasonable period of time. The negotiating sessions are also educational in that the clergymen seek to arouse within the management an awareness of the devastating problem of the ghetto, unemployment, and pointing out the immorality of companies that make profits from Negro consumers while at the same time excluding them from jobs. If negotiations break down, the step of real power and pressure is taken. This fourth step consists of a massive call for economic withdrawal from that company's product or business and accompanying demonstrations publicly if necessary. The ministers go to their pulpits and to other communications media and ask Negroes to stop buying the employer's product or patronizing their business. Clergy-led teams dramatize the dispute to the ghetto inhabitants by picketing the stores where the products in question or the business in question is located and the products are sold. The fall off in trade and the concomitant silencing of the cash register as a result of this boycott is a powerful force in causing the company ultimately to meet the demands. I would like to call it Operation silence the cash register. Silence. You want to talk about a silent night? Silent night, holy night. All the cash is kept in my pocket, right? In most cases, it is not necessary to go to step 4 because most business executives are keenly aware of the Negro's buying power and the consequent effect of its withdrawal. At present, SCLC has Operation Breadbasket functioning in 12 cities, and the results have been remarkable. In Atlanta, Georgia, for instance, the Negro's earning power has been increased by more than 20 million annually over the past 3 years through a carefully disciplined program of selective buying and negotiation by the Negro ministers. During the last 8 months in Chicago, Operation Breadbasket successfully completed negotiations with 3 major industries: milk, soft drinks, and chain grocery stores. 4 of the companies involved concluded reasonable agreements only after short don't buy campaigns. 7 other companies were able to make the requested changes across the conference table without necessitating a boycott. Exactly. 2 other companies, after providing their employment information to the ministers, were sent letters of commendation for their healthy equal employment practices. Now, what he's saying here is you want to, in this program they're doing, you're increasing the earning power of the community because you're demanding that rather than having all these black people rioting, rather than have all these black people unemployed, you are going to the businesses and you are demanding an increase in earning power. The black community is doing that. They're not waiting for someone like a Donald Trump to come along and promise something that he hasn't even done now. They're doing that as a community, headed by the church. Yeah. So all right. Here we go. This is freezing, so let's try to back out. Let's try to back out and come back with a part 2. Thank you all for being patient with us with this thing called technology. All right, I'm back. All right, let's see. All right. I am back. So we're taking this as part 2. We're talking about sources of power. Sources of power. Sources of power. And we're talking about MLK's wonderful plan here. Actually, we're almost done talking about this, but he's talking about economic power within the Black community. And if you're just coming in, please go back and watch part 1 where we began this discussion. But he's talking about Operation Breadbasket that was led by the church, that was led by clergy, that actually went in, right, and began to negotiate to get people off the streets, to get people having jobs, right? They saw that it was a critical need of the Black community. And he's actually detailing what it is they did and how they went about it. And as I said, because we have social media, this could be even more effective than when it was in MLK's day. So he does 2 things. They do 2 things with Operation Breadbasket. They increase the earning power in the Black community by helping people to get jobs, by literally, evangelizing, beating the streets, going into businesses, negotiating with businesses for Black people to get jobs. You want to talk about real evangelism? You want to talk about real gospel? Do that. Helping people to get jobs. So the plan was increasing, right, the earning power in the Black community, but also the second part of that is reserving buying power. So increasing earning power, but reserving buying power and using that with those who demonstrate respect for civil rights for Black people. So you had a twofold thing going on there. They were helping to increase the number of working citizens within the Black community. And as those citizens began to get jobs, and even the ones that did have jobs, they also encouraged them to reserve their buying power for people who believed in civil rights for all, for the Black community, and those who would treat us humanely. I mean, this is not rocket science. But unfortunately, we spend our money with a lot of people who could care diddly squat about Black America. So let that be a lesson, right? Don't spend your money with people who could care less about you as a human being, or who could care less about your people group having civil and human rights. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I've personally been economically boycotting a lot of businesses, a lot of things. I just don't shop there. I don't buy it. The other piece of that is I also don't buy things that Black America makes that is detrimental to the health of Black America. So we have to think about where our money is going. What are we spending it on? What are we investing our money into? Are we investing in the detriment of our community, or are we investing in the health of our community? What are we doing? Right? In closing, he says this. After doing this process, he said the net results added up to approximately 800 new and upgraded jobs for Negro employees, worth over $7 million in new annual income for Negro families. So this worked. I don't know why we stopped doing it. Maybe because he was assassinated and people just dropped the ball. But it worked. They were able to add $7 million in new annual income to the Black community by this process. And 7 million right now is better than 0 million. In Chicago, we have recently added a new dimension to Operation Breadbasket. Along with requesting new job opportunities, we are now requesting that businesses with stores in the ghetto, Doom, 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 right? Businesses with stores in the ghetto deposit the income for those establishments in Negro-owned banks, and that Negro-owned products be placed on the counters of all their stores. So, you own a business in the ghetto, you're getting our dollars, we're going to at least ask you to deposit your money into a Black-owned bank. And if there are people in the community that have products that you can showcase in your store that's in the Black community, we're going to ask you to place their products on your shelves. These were processes that worked. What happened? In this way, we seek to stop the drain of resources out of the ghetto with nothing remaining there for its rehabilitation. The two chain grocery stores with which we have so far negotiated, High Low and National Tea, have readily agreed. They have now opened accounts in the two Negro banks of Chicago, and their shelves display every Negro-owned product of the city. This has given new vibrancy and growth to Negro businesses in Chicago and will contribute to the continued economic growth of the city. My question is, what happened? Who dropped the ball? Yes. Who dropped the ball? Because obviously this was working. Operation Breadbasket was working. So, who dropped the ball? And better question, especially for Chicago and Detroit, who's going to pick it up? I know at least 3 good preachers in Chicago right now that are very well known, have several thousand members that can work Operation Breadbasket. Since we want to make an example out of Chicago and Detroit for everything that's wrong with Black America, if someone from the Democratic National Convention or the Republican National Convention is looking for a plan for Black America to put in their platform, because they don't have one yet, Operation Breadbasket is available for somebody to pick it up. And it worked. And it worked. Appreciate you, man of God, Warren Cave. Warren Cave is actually doing something very similar to Operation Breadbasket. He is helping men get jobs. Hats off to you, minister. Appreciate you. So that is our talk for today. Tomorrow is going to be If you have anybody that is involved in the political arena, if you have people who are running for certain offices, I would encourage you to invite them in tomorrow, because MLK is going to talk about political power and voice. Political power and voice, and what is happening to that political power, how we can leverage that political power, and yeah, it's going to be good stuff tomorrow. Exactly. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's why we are going through the good book right here. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? A lot of people do not realize that MLK was very detailed in things that could help Black America. He talked about our problems. He talked about our successes. He talked about, as we're going to see this week, he talked about the weak areas of Black America, Black community. And at the end of this book, which we'll be getting to hopefully by next week, we're going to complete it. He gives a whole appendix of social programs, of programs that were proposed to the government that were never followed through with. So people are lying, flat out lying about what was actually done during the civil rights era. You have people who acted like there was no plans, there was no push, there was no nothing, when the reality was there were proposals given to our government that they have yet to follow through on. Yet to follow through. So we can't talk about whether it was successful or not, or unsuccessful, if the government is just sitting on proposals from 1964, 1968, right? So this is where we are stopping for today. I hope that you got something out of today. We talked about sources of power, ideological power, and economic power. Remember, not just in Black businesses, but in Black consumerism and in becoming a working member of society, a working member of society. So, agreed, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is a blueprint. There were proposals that were laid out that we're going to take a look at. So, thank you all for joining me again today. And let's hope that we can get through one full session without Facebook Live cutting off. Somebody email Mark Zuckerberg about that. You know, we can do 3 hours on Facebook Live of foolishness, but every time we talk about power, real sources of power, we get cut off at about 40 minutes. So somebody who knows him really well, tell him to fix that glitch in his Facebook Live, you know, that it'll pick up real sources of information. All right. That is all I have for you all today. I hope that you have a great and wonderful day. This has been a Teachable Tuesday, and I encourage you to continue to learn, continue to research, continue to grow as we do these readings. This is only tapping the surface. There's much more to learn. Take care, and God bless. Again, thank you all for watching here. I tell you the same thing, that I enjoy these talks. Remember, this is only the beginning. This is only the beginning. There's much more to hear. There's much more to see. There's much more to learn. Take care, and God bless.